Earlier this week, we celebrated Independence Day on the 4th of July. It's worth taking a few minutes to reflect on what leadership lessons we can learn from this historical event. When you think about it, the founders formed the ultimate startup, not of a company, but rather a nation. And not just a nation, but an expansive notion. A prairie fire philosophy of self-government whose embers of freedom set other nations around the world ablaze in the years that followed. These ordinary people from a distant past, with virtues and vices, accomplished the extraordinary. We can acknowledge their failings and at the same time learn from what they achieved. So more specifically, what can we learn from them related to inspiring a shared vision? On July 9, 1776, a crowd in New York City tore down a gilded statue of a powerful man of privilege sitting astride a horse. Why? Well, the man of power and privilege was the British monarch, King George III, and the soldiers of the Continental Army were moved to tear down his statue following the reading of the words of the Declaration of Independence, approved days earlier on the 4th of July. The Continental Army, led by General George Washington, were preparing to defend New York against invasion by British and Hessian military forces. The battles of Lexington and Concord the year before, in 1775, had launched the colonies into open war with Britain, one of the wealthiest nations in the world, with a powerful and well-trained army and navy. In contrast, the colonies relied upon locally controlled militias that lacked training, uniforms, and arms. When the founders of a startup company invested in an uncertain venture, they faced financial and perhaps reputational risk. But these founders of a startup nation risked their very lives. Given this David versus Goliath matchup, the founders needed to create unity of effort. They needed to come together around a daring vision of the future. Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, had already produced major shifts in the public sentiment, but the colonies and their delegates needed to unify and formally commit to a common vision. The Declaration of Independence accomplished that. On June the 11th, 1776, the Second Continental Congress appointed the Committee of Five to draft and present language for approval. The committee included John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson wrote the first draft with language that included a harsh criticism of slavery, but that language was rejected during the weeks-long effort to find compromise language that could garner the support of all 13 colonies, including the slaveholding ones. The efforts of the Committee of Five leveraged four key principles related to inspiring a shared vision. To successfully inspire a shared vision, leaders must take a long-term view, build a shared vision with others, act as a catalyst for organizational change, and influence others to translate vision into action. How do these principles show up in the actual language of the Declaration? Well, it begins when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. One people. That's pretty aspirational when you consider that up to the writing of this document, these were not one people, but rather 13 independent colonies with distinct histories and cultures. So this declaration was intended to galvanize unity, common purpose, and American identity. It provided a shared vision. Later in the Declaration, we reach its most famous phrase: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal." The Declaration lays out an audacious ideal for God-given rights. It didn't instantly bring these rights to reality for all. Large numbers of people remained disenfranchised. This was a promissory note to the American people, an ideal future that we continue to strive for today as a more perfect union. The Declaration of Independence remains our North Star. This vision statement, the Declaration of Independence, proved to be a catalyst for action and influenced causes for independence and equality in more than 20 nations throughout the years. Abraham Lincoln believed that the Declaration represented the highest ideals of the American Revolution. In a Peoria speech in October 1854, he argued against slavery, saying, "Our Republican robe is soiled and trailed in the dust. Let us repurify it. Let us readopt the Declaration of Independence, and with it, the practices and policy which harmonize with it. If we do this, we shall not only have saved the Union, but we shall have saved it as to make and keep it forever worthy of the saving. And during the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention in New York, the first Women's Rights Convention, they modeled their Declaration of Sentiments on the Declaration of Independence, insisting upon equality for women, or as they stated, all men and women are created equal. So being a leadership coach, let me leave you with some coaching questions to consider. What is your Declaration of Independence? In other words, what bold change is necessary? What are you doing to build a long-term shared vision within your organization? And finally, how can you better translate that vision into action?